Here's our update for week number 6. Glad you're all still here watching and supporting me. This is a busy week. Holy cow! So it's if you can tell, I have bookshelves behind me. Yes, it was a busy week. We finally got our house put back together after the sewer line backed up and got that fixed last week. So yay! We're hoping that we're done with all the home projects for a little while. Yeah, it's been quite a lot. So for this week for my classes, let's just jump in and get going. This week for my interfaith class, we talked about what does it mean to be an interfaith leader? What are things that have happened in your life to help you want to be an interfaith leader or do more with this? Like, what is your story? Basically, we talked about some ideas. Ironically, I think there was a lot of like democratic political ideas of like telling stories and things, more liberal ideas of using storytelling to cause emotions in people and encouraging those emotions to do things. In fact, we used an example, President Obama's talk during the 2004 Democratic convention. So that was while he was a senator, not running for president, basically. He was supporting John Kerry, in fact, in that one. So it's just interesting, tactics that are commonly used among liberals to get your emotions going and things. Interesting to learn them. But anyways, telling stories is a good way to encourage people to for a common cause, those kinds of things. So, the story I told for my life, like why do I see myself at? Why am I interested in interfaith leadership? Basically, why is this something I want to be involved with? So I had an experience on my mission. I served at LDS mission in the Arkansas Little Rock mission back in 96 to 98. So it was a fun time to be back there learning. I learned a ton through Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi. The Bible Belt taught me a lot because I'd never really done much outside of, like vacationing outside of Utah. We hadn't really done a whole lot. So I did not realize that I had inadvertently accepted a whole bunch of assumptions that were somewhat common here in Utah sometimes. But when I got out to the South, I started meeting people. That changed everything. I couldn't hold those assumptions anymore. The one that really stood out to me was I was really surprised on my mission. So I'm teaching people that are Pentecostal and Baptist and Church of God in Christ, Church of Christ, lots of different groups that are out there. And I kept hearing stories of people that were praying. They would tell us these stories of, oh yeah, my mother was sick, or my sister was sick, or my aunt was sick, or a neighbor was sick, or whoever was injured or sick. And we all got together and we prayed for them and they got better. It was amazing, just a miraculous stuff. Even the doctors couldn't explain it. And the first time or two I heard this, in my mind I thought, that's impossible. That can't be. There has to be some other explanation. They just got better anyways. It didn't work out. Whatever. In my mind, I was trying to justify why their spiritual experience wasn't true. And the reason that I was doing that is because I believed that God did not help people outside of his people who joined his church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, basically. Outside of being an LDS member, God didn't help you. That was my assumption. I didn't even know I had it. But I kept running into these stories of people. After about the third or fourth time I had these stories told to me by people that are like, yeah, look, there's my daughter right there. She's alive. We all prayed. She's healed. It was a miraculous thing. And I'm like, in my mind, my brain's going, that doesn't work. That's impossible. But they're sitting right in front of me. Like, they're here. It's real. So it really caused some cognitive dissonance in my mind, and it challenged me on that belief. As I pondered that on my mission, I realized that, maybe what I'm believing isn't completely accurate. Maybe God does bless his people. And that opened up a whole new set of ideas for me. And it really helped me. Actually, I felt closer to the Spirit, more of a confirmation. I'm like, oh, this makes sense. Remember that idea of the seed planted? So the seed I planted was maybe God does help people. And then I realized that we're all God's children. He loves us equally. He wants the best for us all. So he will help us. If we have faith in him, whether we are a member of any church or not, whether we're LDS or not, or whatever it is, he will bless us and help us. And that was pretty eye-opening for me and liberating to realize there's so much more good. There's so much more opportunity. People can have faith. People can be blessed. People can have God in their life without being a member of the LDS church, basically. And it made me have to think deeper about what I believe. What do I really believe? And I started realizing, man, I didn't even know I had that assumption. So it's got me thinking, what are other assumptions I have that I don't realize that maybe I need to get rid of? So I tried to go through a few other ones on my mission. And since then, I've still kept looking at those ideas. What can I do to be better? And now if you look right here, this aisle right there, you can see lots and lots of good. Now, most of these are LDS books here. Actually, the bookshelf right below is all my my Quran and Torah and Confucius and Popol Vuh, and all those are right down here, just below here. In fact, that's right there. That book right there, kind of a light purple one, is the Rig Veda. So Hindu books, Buddhist books, Quran. I have a lot more as I learn and understand from other groups. So that was kind of a fun thing to share and talk about this week in my interfaith class. My Mormonism class, we got talking a little bit more about church history this week. We spent a lot of time talking about early U.S. history, but this week we went into more church history. So we talked about Joseph Smith. This is after his first vision. He's established the church, and why there was so much hate and anger against them. Now we think about this from an official church standpoint. We see the concept of people hating the church because it's a different belief than everybody else. They don't like it, and that's okay. And really, the church doesn't. In the official church history, they don't go into a ton of detail. And granted, it has been a little while since I've read the Saints or the comprehensive history of the church, but I don't remember a whole lot of detail in there about. It's just, oh, the church was hated. They were hated by everybody around them. So we got to explore this in a little more detail and kind of fill in some of those cracks as to why were they so hated, other than they were just believing in something different. Well, if you remember my discussion on Religion of a Different Color, that book that I've read for my Mormonism class, we haven't used it yet, but I'm hoping it's coming up soon. Paul Reeve in that book talks about how the Mormons were treated like Indians, basically. Skin color was a big issue in the 1800s. And so if you were evangelical, you were white. If you were Mormon, you're not white enough, was the challenge. And so that was the way of justifying hating Mormons, because they're not white enough. They're not good enough. They're not true Americans because they believe all this different stuff. Well, then you got to look at it too. Like, for instance, we talked about Jackson County and those areas. There's another problem that arose. Because Jackson County was seen as Zion. Let's gather here. Everybody come here. Everybody from Ohio, come here. We have to realize if you're coming from Ohio to Missouri, you're coming from a northern area to a southern area. So there's more abolitionist ideas. You're getting free blacks coming down to a slave state. Missouri was a slave state. So this posed some problems because they're worried that if free blacks came to Missouri, they would then start to spread abolitionist ideas to the slave blacks in Missouri, and they would want to revolt and rise up and cause problems, which there was some precedent for this. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, in fact. So Joseph Smith actually had to tell the blacks, you're not allowed to gather in Jackson County because of the laws of the state and the people here. So we need you to gather outside of Jackson County, create your own community, and we'll work with you and help you and do things. But Joseph tried to help follow the laws of the state of Missouri because they wouldn't allow free blacks in the state. But so that was one concern. The other concern that was more local was as the Mormons were moving in, they're coming in large droves. That had a problem uh, because that means land. They need land to build houses on and to farm. So they're buying up all the land in the area, which means housing prices are going up because there's greater demand for everything. They're shifting the economy of what's going on in Jackson County. Because there was a lot of suspicion, a lot of the Mormons kept their trade inside themselves. They would trade with each other and only go outside of that to non-members when they needed to. So that meant they came in, changed the economic area, but then stopped spending their money in with everybody else as much as a bunch of, if it was just a bunch of Christians, evangelicals that moved down to Jackson County, they would have spent all their money in the economy and everybody would have seen an uplift. But the Mormons sometimes didn't spend their money. They kind of kept it within themselves, within the circle. So there's changes of economic structure that was starting to happen in that area. Not to mention, when the Mormons came down, they grew in size so quickly that they became a large voting bloc. So when elections would come up for like city and county and state seats, the Mormons would vote in a way, they would basically collectively vote. So if the Mormons believed one person was good, they got an overwhelming majority. When Mormons ran for office, most Mormons would vote for them. And so they started getting a lot more Mormons into their government offices. For the non-Mormons, they're like, hold on, wait a minute here. It feels like to us that they're taking over the area. So that was part of the problems too that were coming up in this area. The biggest ones that came up, and in fact, Dallin H. Oaks, president, he's the first counselor in the first presidency, technically the actual president of the Quorum of the 12 right now too. He did some research into the martyrdom of Joseph Smith, and he thinks that Joseph was killed for political reasons, which is really interesting. He's got a great research paper he put together a long time ago about that. But the challenge was, so the government's not helping the members. So Joseph decides, I'm going to run for office. I think that the government has gone corrupt. I think America's struggling. We've got problems. We've got dumb politicians. We've got all kinds of issues. I'm going to run for president. As part of his campaign in running for president, he wanted to get rid of slavery. And that was something that really caused a lot of people to hate Joseph because they didn't want slavery to go away. Now, Joseph's idea wasn't to just go, guess what? No more slavery. We're done. All the slaves are free. What they proposed actually was a tax, and that tax would actually raise funds for the federal government, and that federal government funds, so that money they would raise, would actually be used to purchase slaves from Southern slave owners at market rates. So they would get the money as if they sold their slaves because the government would be buying all the slaves. And then the government would buy them up and then just let them be free, basically. So that's what his plan was. And among other things that he wanted to do as well to redress wrongs for the saints, as well as redress wrongs for other minorities and other groups as well. He was not popular. So it was around that time that the Nauvoo Expositor came out. The interesting thing about the martyrdom of Joseph Smith is that so Joseph and Hiram were part of the city council of the city of Nauvoo. They had other members and non-members who were on the city council as well. When the Nauvoo Expositor came out, so this is a publication that was specifically put together to be a newspaper that was against the Mormons. And it was some non-Mormons, some ex-Mormons and things were a part of it. They made one publication, thousands and thousands of copies of one publication. That's all they did. Everybody read it and went, this isn't good. If they keep publishing this stuff, they are going to cause people in Nauvoo a lot of problems. So they the city council, and you can read, it's public record, the city minutes from Nauvoo in the 1800s and read this. The city council decided as a council that they needed the sheriff to go destroy the Nauvoo Expositor's printing press. So the sheriff followed the orders of the council, went out and broke up their printing press, so they couldn't use it anymore, basically. Not as bad as what they did to W.W. Phelps or other people in the Mormons. They broke it up, stole it, discarded the papers everywhere, burned the house down that was in. When the Mormons had theirs destroyed, it was a big issue. They didn't do near that much when the sheriff did it for the expositor. But the people in that area where the expositor was created a stir that said, we think this was wrong, this was bad, this was not a good thing. So they actually accused Joseph and Hiram of creating this public nuisance problem and these other issues. So they tried to get them in jail. Well, they eventually got them in jail, and then they were found innocent by a Mormon judge and a non-Mormon judge of those charges. And as soon as they were innocent of those charges, they brought up treason charges. So they had to be held over for the treason trial, and that was when they were killed. Basically, they never made it to that trial. So it was just interesting, all these things that were going on at the time that culminated in Joseph being killed and the Mormons being kicked out of Missouri up into Caldwell County and other places. So there's lots of things that are a part of this. Part of it was, again, the doctrines, the other concepts and ideas of the teachings of the church at the time. There was a lot of issues around land, voting rights, other things. And granted, not all the members of the church were treating the non-members good. Part of Hans Mill was a response to a bunch of Mormons who went and did their own little vigilanteism. And that was not a good thing. They shouldn't have done that. But some acted on their own and caused some more problems. So it was a crazy time. But hopefully that gives you a bit more context around what was going on during that time period and some of the other issues that were coming up for people that we don't always hear about. So it was a fun week in that one. In my 6420 class, religious readings, the book we read this week is this one, Denmark Vesey's Bible. This was a really good book. Not a long one, thankfully. It was a little shorter. It was kind of refreshing to have a little bit shorter book. Sarah Osborne's book was huge. I really had to spend some extra time reading that one to get through it in time to discuss it in class. So this was a slave revolt. Okay, Denmark Vesey was a black man that he was brought over from Africa as a slave. There was a gentleman, Mr. Vesey, I just forgot his first name. He would load up a boat. He lived in South Carolina. He loaded up a boat of slaves, and he would take them down to San Domingo. So he was down more in the Caribbean. Every year, he'd take a boatload of slaves down, sell them, then come back and do his life, do his business, other stuff he was doing in South Carolina, and do it again. Well, he took a boat down one year, and the slave owner who bought Denmark Vesey said, "Dude, he has epilepsy. He's useless to me. I want my money back." So Mr. Vesey took this slave who later got named, his American name was given to him was Denmark, and Vesey, because he was a slave of Mr. Vesey, he's just like, "Well, I'll just take you back and you can be a servant in my house and things." Well, somehow, we don't get into the story a whole lot in this book, but somehow Denmark wins the lottery and makes a bunch of money. And so he buys his freedom. He gets his manumission is what it's called. So he buys his freedom, lives out on his own, gets a job, does stuff. He is educated, so he knows how to read, starts reading the Bible and looking at other things. He was Christianized like everybody else was at the time. You went to church with your slave owner, basically, and you'd sit up in the rafters in the very back of the room where the blacks would, while the whites were up front. But they would Christianize their slaves. That was part of their obligation of being a slave owners, to teach them the gospel. So anyways, Denmark learned how to read. He learned how to think, and he started coming up with scriptures that said, this is bad. This is, slavery is a bad thing. One of them was Exodus, I want to say 21:19, 21:16, something like that. That it says in there basically that if you steal another human being and then sell them, that's capital punishment. That is punishable by death, according to the law of Moses, which would be your Old Testament times around Exodus and so forth. He took that as that's slavery. Slavery is bad. Slavery should, according to the Bible, slavery is punishable by death. So he rallied a bunch of other free blacks and slaves, got them together, and they hatched a plot in Charleston, South Carolina. One day, they were going to sound the alarm bell in the town. And usually when that happens, that means they need there's a house on fire or something. They need a fire brigade. Most of the men of the town are going to come out and respond to that alarm to help out in whatever they needed to do, whatever the problem was. So a lot of the women and children would stay home. The men would come outside to go deal with the problem. The goal was to sound that alarm one morning, get all the men to come out, and then the blacks would basically have knives and clubs, and they would basically beat the white men to death, kill the white men off. Then they would go kill the women and children and literally massacre the Charleston, South Carolina town, the whole population. So this was, if he had been successful, he wasn't, but if Denmark Vesey had been successful, we would probably learn about him in history books because it would have been one of the largest massacres in American history. It would have been hundreds and hundreds of people that they killed. They would have just wiped out the white population of Charleston. So, and this is around 1820s, 1822 timeframe when this happened. So what ends up happening is shortly before they were going to carry out their plan, some of the slaves tell their slave owners about the plan, and the slave owners tell other slave owners, and it turns into this big deal. They arrest Denmark Vesey and about 9 other guys and go through this court trial to deal with them. They were all found guilty, and they were all hung, basically, and that was it. There was a slave revolt before Denmark Vesey's in another part of the country that I'm trying to remember the name of that one that happened. It's I don't remember it right now off the top of my head, but they had a slave revolt, and so they changed the laws and made it harder on slaves because of that revolt. But it didn't stop Vesey. So actually, after Vesey's slave revolt that almost happened, there were people that were saying we should stop teaching blacks how to read because they're learning these things, and everybody else said no, it's our obligation. So this is interesting. In the 1800s, blacks were seen as anatomically different than whites. They were also seen as lesser than whites. But from a spiritual standpoint, they were seen as equal. They equally needed to be saved and were equally accepted by God. So it was kind of a weird dichotomy that they had to justify Christianity and slavery at the same time. But that's what they had. So it was important. It was an obligation to save the souls of our slaves. So they encouraged them to still read the Bible, but they decided what we need to do is give them a version of the Bible that is massaged over. So it kind of cuts out all the things that could be seen as anti-slavery and give them a Bible. I don't know if they ever actually made that Bible and published it, but that's what they were doing. And so what this book talks about, Jeremy Shipper, sorry if I said his name wrong, if you know how to say his last name, I think it's Shipper, but in this book, he spends like half the book talking about all the religious sermons and publications that these people were coming out with that were pro-slavery. How did they justify it using the Bible? So this book is about how was slavery justified with the Bible and condemned with the same Bible. How were they using the Bible against each other, basically? So if you ever thought about, does slavery exist in the Bible? Is it condoned in the Bible? Is it condemned in the Bible? Read this book and you'll see it. It's a fascinating contrast that he has in there on these. So that's what we've learned this week. Hopefully this update has been an enjoyable one for you. I look forward to seeing you next week for the next update we have. We're starting to get into some books on Mormonism, so there'll be some fun, controversial things we'll be able to talk about for next couple of weeks. Yeah, follow along. Please share these videos out. Encourage more people to come follow. Like the videos, like the page, subscribe to us. So that helps us out. If you like the videos and comment on them, more people will see them as well. If it gets the algorithm working in our favor. And yeah, I hope you're enjoying. What are you learning from these? Put them in here. Oh, I do have a question for you. So I got two things I want to think about. One is the question. I'm writing essays we have some papers we've had to write for our classes, like for my Mormonism class, we've written a couple papers. I'm also working on a major, like a 16 to 20 page final paper for my religious studies class, a big, almost a thesis type project, not quite that big, but it's kind of a mini thesis, I guess. Would you like me to share those with you? Put in the comments if you would. Say yes. If you'd like to, I'll share my research that I'm learning with you as we go along, so you can follow along with those as well if you're interested in some of those. Some of them have been kind of interesting to talk about. So if you'd like, I can start doing more of those. Also, thank you everybody who are following us. We're over 500 followers, which is awesome. Thank you so much. It's taken us 2.5 years to get to this point, 3.5 years to get to this point. So hopefully we can get to 1,000 a lot faster. So please share this channel out. We just want to help more people learn the scriptures. We're going through the New Testament right now in our daily video series as well, and trying to help teach more people more good things to help them to think better. So if you want to follow along with my master's degree, please watch these videos. We're more than happy to teach you what I'm learning, so you don't have to spend all the money that I'm spending to get educated. So we'll see you in the next video.